Okay, welcome everyone. Before we begin, would you please silence your phone or other devices? I'm Glenn Moots, professor here at Northwood University and director of Northwood's Forum for Citizenship and Enterprise. And I'm very happy to see all of you here tonight. Congratulations on having the hottest ticket in town, and I promise you will get back for plenty of the final game tonight. So that's the other hottest ticket, but not in town. Welcome to our last event of the spring semester. For those of you who are new to our forum programs, yeah, come on down with the surveys. Don't wait. Please add your name and email address to the sign-up sheet at the back of the auditorium. So those of you who would like to be made aware of future forum programs like this, in fact we had 3 debates last semester. This is our only debate this semester. I put a pad back there. Just put your name and email on there, and I will contact you about events, especially as we start up again in the fall. We owe a tremendous thanks to our co-sponsors, the Institute for Humane Studies and the John Templeton Foundation. They have been our partners throughout the semester and, in fact, throughout the year, and they supported tonight's event as well. Founded in 1961 and located in Arlington, Virginia, the Institute for Humane Studies advances a freer society by facilitating the development of students and scholars who share an interest in liberty. And students, if you have any interest in IHS programs, be sure to contact me and I'll point you in the right direction. They have lots of great opportunities over the summer if you're looking to learn some things over the summer from some very fine faculty. And the IHS sponsorship is enabled by generous support from the John Templeton Foundation. The John Templeton Foundation serves as a philanthropic catalyst for discoveries relating to the big questions of human purpose and ultimate reality. And we thank them as well. Students, IHS wants your feedback, and you've noticed we have students going down the aisles right now handing out small cards. They have a QR code as well as a tiny URL on them, and those serve as the survey for tonight's event. And I'd like you to use those, again, to provide feedback on this program, and you also have an opportunity to tell us who you think won this debate, and that's always very interesting to us. So please get one of those. We also have traditional paper copies as well, and so if you want one of those, just ask and we'll provide those later during the break or after the debate. Now, before I introduce our moderator, Professor Ouellette, let me explain our format for tonight's debate on the question, does the world need more sweatshops? We'll begin with 15-minute opening statements from our speakers. Professor Tokarev, as the affirmative, will begin. Professor Johnson, as the negative, will follow. They will then have 7 minutes to ask questions of one another from their tables using the same order. And Professor Ouellette will keep order. This will take us about 45 minutes. We'll then take a 10-minute break. During that time, you'll be able to stretch your legs, and our debaters will have a chance to prepare their closing statements. That break is also your chance to submit questions. And so during that break, our students will have 3x5 cards, and you'll see them. They'll be milling around with the cards with their hands raised. Just ask them for a card, write out your question, and you can give them to me, give them to one of the students, or give them to our moderator. And then when we get back from the break, we'll have 15 minutes of your questions, and those will be handled again by our moderator, Professor Ouellette. And she will call us back to order and we'll proceed through those questions. After that, both of our speakers will have 7 minutes for their closing statements. So the entire event will take about 90 minutes from the time that we start. And again, please get one of those codes or tiny URLs and give us feedback on the event. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator and turn the event over to her. Professor Ouellette has taught and mentored students at Northwood for over 15 years and has been chair of the Fashion Marketing and Management program for 12 years. She is one of our most respected and devoted professors. She obtained her undergraduate degree from Adrian College in fashion merchandising and her graduate degree from Central Michigan University in home economics, where she studied apparel and merchandising management. This topic is especially important to her as the fashion industry is notorious for breaching social contracts, such as the use of child labor in the clothing and shoe manufacturing processes, in addition to producing counterfeit goods and polluting the environment. Jill has been educating students on these subjects throughout her teaching career and looks forward to a lively debate this evening. And I know I speak for the entire university and especially her students when I say that while we're glad to have her with us tonight, we will miss her terribly when she leaves for her new position at Adrian College in the fall. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jill Ouellette.
Thank you, Dr. Moots, for that introduction and for asking me to join you tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare ourselves for what I'm sure will be a very lively debate, I'm reminded of a quote by Alexandria Trenfor. And I know my fashion students are very aware of this quote because I use it often. And she said, "The best teachers show the students where to look, but not what to see." This debate will give you the opportunity to look into the subject through the eyes of two highly educated academicians who will share with you their thoughts and research on the subject of economics, sweatshop activities, and the relationship between the two. In the end, you will become much more enlightened about the subject and hopefully continue to carry on this conversation beyond this debate tonight. And as Dr. Moots mentioned, you will also have an opportunity to ask questions. So with that said, I want to introduce to you our speakers. Alex Tokarov, Professor Alex Tokarov grew up in socialist Bulgaria. He earned his PhD at Southern Illinois University. He has taught courses at 6 colleges and universities and extensively debated and presented on classical liberal ideas throughout the United States and Europe. He edited the Bulgarian translation of Hans Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed. At Northwood University, he serves as assistant professor of economics, has led internship opportunities for Northwood students, has helped students publish their research, and organizes Northwood University's Freedom Week, which is now in its 3rd year. He is married and has 2 children and has been an American citizen since January. Congratulations, and thank you for joining us. We are also honored to have with us tonight James Randall Johnson. Jim Johnson has been a professor at the college and university level for 34 years. He completed his undergraduate studies at Louisiana State University and Eastern Michigan University. He is a graduate of the Tuck Executive Program at the Graduate School of Business at Dartmouth College. Earned his law degree from Western Michigan University School of Law, and did his post-juris doctorate work at Harvard Law School in the summers of 1988 and 1990. From 2011 to 15, he completed doctoral coursework in political science at Wayne State University and now is completing his PhD. Professor Johnson has also served as both a line and staff officer in the United States Navy and has served as a Navy JAG officer. During his corporate career, he has been a CEO, corporate general counsel, and director of international development working in Moscow, Siberia, South America, Latin America, and Australia. He has consulted for General Motors at over 45 locations in Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. As an academic, he has taught both business and political science at undergraduate and graduate levels at a number of institutions, including serving as an adjunct professor here at Northwood University until 2015. As a journalist, he has covered wars and conflict from the front lines of Lebanon, Israel, Gaza, Syria, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, Nepal, and Colombia. He has worked or traveled to over 90 nations. He is a frequent political analyst for television affiliates and writes for newspapers. And in 2015, Professor Johnson and his wife moved to New York, where she is a vice president of general manager of NBC television affiliates. The couple live in the Finger Lakes region, where Professor Johnson teaches in the Department of Law at Ithaca College. Welcome. We shall begin. Our speakers now have 15 minutes for their opening statements.
First thing I have to do is give credit to all my students who did research on sweatshops last year, especially to Alex Burns, Philip Schlosser, Tony Sierra, and Konstantin Zhukov. And above everything, my colleague, Professor Powell from Texas, who was so kind to provide even the slides. So I'm here, much like Tom Sawyer, getting the credit for the painted fence. Also, when we get to the Q&A section, I will have to, in advance, thank the former President Bill Clinton for giving me the answer to all of these questions in his unforgettable words. Slightly paraphrased here, the economy genius. A colleague of mine today sent me an email wishing me luck in enlightening the audience. I don't think anyone here has come to get enlightened, though. And to prove this, let me see if you have never heard the arguments for or against sweatshops, and if you do not have a strong opinion on this issue, please raise your hand. Okay, Jim, we have a few people that we will fight for their hearts and minds. The rest of them, probably? Okay, cool. If you're here, most likely you need the extra credit, or you have come to see your side win. Okay, can we have, okay, we already have it here. Today, April the 4th, is my grandma Gasha's birthday. She raised my dad alone after her husband and the rest of her children died. She moved to the city and she got a job in a sweatshop. This allowed my dad to work only part-time and finish school. Grandma got sick from the bad conditions in that sweatshop, and she retired on a pension of less than $1 per day. By that time, my dad Mitko was a math professor. He married his student Krasi, and I was born. So just imagine if the Bulgarian socialist government that took over with the help of the Red Army in 1944 had felt like the American bleeding heart progressivists. What if they had demanded the closing of sweatshops? What if they had forbidden children to work in the years immediately after World War II? Well, I might not have been here to tell you my story today. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not here to defend state-run sweatshops, kidnapping, slave labor, or any other violent act for that matter. Before I went to college, I was forced to work in several government sweatshops and collective farms. I was even enslaved for 2 years and 9 days in the so-called Bulgarian People's Army. I grew up as a Marxist and opponent of sweatshops. Well, you know the saying, if you're not a socialist at 20, you have no heart. And if you're still a socialist at 30, you have small hands. Okay, whatever. I went to study economics, and it taught me to think with my brain rather than with my heart. I am here to defend the Northwood idea of a global free enterprise system, a system based on human rights and individual responsibility. And I'm here to prove beyond reasonable doubt that sweatshops are good, and we need more of them. Sweatshops were and continue to be a necessary step in the evolution of the economy, from hunter-gatherer to agrarian to industrial to service-dominated. In just 25 years, the last 25, the growth of new industrial enterprises in the third world has lifted more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. When you study the different regions in the developing world, a strong correlation emerges. Places with higher index of economic freedom get more sweatshops. They experience faster growth and bigger reduction in poverty rates. As people become more productive, they get better education and health care, longer lives, and even cleaner environments. The clearest demonstration, I think, of how much people value the opportunities for advancement offered by sweatshops is the way they vote with their own feet, moving by the millions every year out of the rural and into the city areas of the world. A few examples. The extreme poverty rate in Lagos, Nigeria, it's less than half what it is in the rural parts of the country. Some 3 million people in Bangladesh today work in textile sweatshops. Many of them are women. Women empowered as never before in the country's history. Now, we might deplore these conditions from our first world couches, but that should not blind us to the fact that these are still preferable to the alternatives which are realistically available to them. The Bangladeshi wages paid to garment workers, they may seem appallingly low on a full belly. But just in 4 years, from 2006 to 2010, they nearly doubled. Kolkata in India, it's a place, as you know, of great deprivation. But the poverty rate is 11% now, while in West Bengal, it is still 24%. For South Asia, the region, in 1990, more than half of the population lived in extreme poverty, less than $1 a day. Today, this figure is 4 times lower. The best example of the benefits of sweatshops is East Asia and the Pacific region, where poverty has declined 15 times, from 60 down to just 4%. To quote from the New York Times columnist and former economist Paul Krugman, who is no friend of free market capitalism, as you well know, wherever the new export industries have grown, there has been measurable improvement in the lives of ordinary people. Sweatshops offer a higher wage than workers could get elsewhere in order to get them to move. This has a ripple effect throughout the economy. Rural wages rise. The pool of unemployed urban dwellers shrink. Factories compete with each other for workers, and urban wages also begin to rise. Close the sweatshops, and you might reverse the growth that has been achieved. It has been a huge boon for the workers in those nations. A policy, says Paul Krugman, and this is Krugman, you can't go any further to the left without going bananas. A policy of good jobs in principle, but no jobs in practice might assuage our consciences, but it is no favor to its alleged beneficiaries. Jeffrey Sachs, the well-known author of The End of Poverty, noted, "My concern is not that there are too many sweatshops, but that there are too few." You will hear from the next speaker of children who labor by candlelight in filthy basements, of women mixing toxic chemicals without adequate protective gear, of men who stay dehydrated to minimize the necessity of bathroom breaks, and accidents that have taken lives. And it's okay to cry. But do not feel guilty when you wear clothes and shoes manufactured by them. The truth is that buying sweatshop products at our local superstores does more to alleviate poverty in the world than all the Bono concerts have ever done. More than all the US government aid to third world countries. More than all of your generous donations to the United Nations charitable programs. Boycotting sweatshops, insisting on regulations meant to improve work conditions and raise wages. This leaves millions of people the choice of crime, prostitution, or starvation. The only short-term beneficiaries of such consumer activism and legal barriers are certain declining, unionized American industries and their puppets in Washington. Yes, I mean Hillary. I mean Bernie. And I mean Trump. One reason why Africa is lagging behind other underdeveloped parts of the world is the inability of local governments to create an environment conducive to opening enough sweatshops. Okay, thank you. I give the rest of my time.
Here are my glasses. It's amazing when you don't have your glasses on, you can never find them. Thank God I always carry two. First, before I get into my welcome, I'd like to thank Alex for telling me what I'm going to say. Very, very, very kind of you. I should just sit down now because obviously you know precisely where I'm going with my arguments. Before we get into the substance of what I have to say to you, I want to thank Dr. Glenn Moots for putting this on and making this possible. Glenn had me when I was on faculty here as a moderator for one of these with Max Boots last year, I believe. And Glenn, I've known for several years, and Glenn is simply, and I say this with all accuracy, one of the finest and most decent human beings that I know. And I know a lot of really bad people, you know. He is really a good guy. And I don't say that just because he went to LSU. But that's a large part of it. Secondly, don't worry about the final score tonight. The final score tonight will be Nova 84, North Carolina 76. All right, take it to the bank. And if I'm wrong and you lose money, I'll be on a plane back to New York relatively soon. So. You know, I learned something. I'm older than Alex, believe it or not. Considerably older than Alex. I learned something along the way the last 34 years of teaching at the university level, the last 30 years of practicing law, and the last decade and a half of being a journalist around the world. I learned that I'm not terribly bright. I'm not bright enough as an academician, for example, to learn about conditions of the world, complex global issues, be they in political science, in law, in economics, social science. I'm not bright enough to learn about any of these issues through the refracted lens of a textbook or a peer-reviewed article written by someone else. I can learn issues, I can learn terms, but for me, I need something more than that. I need to experience it. I learned this first doing conflict journalism in the places that Jill mentioned that I've covered around the world. I need to go there. I need to see it. I need to feel it. I need to fear it. I need to immerse myself in it. I need to smell it. I need to taste it. I need to hear it. And collectively, from doing all of those things, I can walk away with an experience that allows me to then come back, look at the academic material, the textbooks, peer-reviewed material, and ancillary populist material, and begin to synthesize this stuff and put it together. But simply approaching a topic like sweatshops, which is a complex issue, by the way, even though it was presented in a binary fashion, and we'll address that in a minute. It's a complicated issue. It's a complicated issue, however, that can be addressed. But I'm not bright enough to do that on my own. I had to go and I had to see about it firsthand. And so I did. Aside from conflict journalism, my wife and I decided, because she has a strong interest in global poverty as I do, I am, by the way, a bleeding heart liberal. And I am far, far, far to the left of Bernie Sanders. He's far too conservative for me to ever consider voting for. And my former students, many of whom I see here, first, welcome again. It's nice to see you. You're not shocked at the Diet Mountain Dew. My students will tell you that. One thing I will say about the Northwood idea, whether it's the idea, the administration, or what, in my time here, I expected, when I came here from SVSU, I expected to get fired, if not at the end of the first week, maybe at the end of the first semester, not invited back. And I expected that every single semester for 4 straight years. And I've been on faculty at 8 colleges and universities. Never, ever have I been on faculty anywhere where I was left alone to the degree that I was here. I do television locally. I'll do it tomorrow night. Please watch in, throw in some softball questions for me. As liberal as could possibly be, and never once did anyone interfere. If laissez-faire means anything in terms of academic freedom, it's experienced here at the last place I ever expected to see it. And I appreciate that, and it's something I carried with me. It's something I treasure. And I knew I was home again when I walked into Griswold. It was freezing, and I passed a car that had a bumper sticker that said NRA smitten with a mitten, and something about I'd rather be in a lawn chair. I'm not sure what it said. But this is a serious, serious issue. My wife and I spent more than one trip to Bangladesh, which is not a fun place to go. It's not an easy place to get to. We've made multiple trips to Bangladesh to explore sweatshops, to explore living conditions. We spent time with the UNIS folks in Chittagong, University of Chittagong, but most of it in Dhaka. It is a place that, to describe it, requires a skill set beyond my pay grade. It is achingly, bone-breakingly poor. Thousands of people die there every year simply from the elements of life, let alone sweatshops. They're ushered along that route to death frequently through sweatshops, as we're going to talk about, and as Alex has already said, I'm going to tell you. It's not a pretty sight. And the problem is, it's something that doesn't have to happen. Simply, this is not a binary issue. Alex presented this as a binary issue. He presented every single argument that I read in preparation for this event. When I first told my wife I was going to come back to Michigan and debate the issue of does the world need more sweatshops, she said, this is an educated woman. She supports me financially. This is a woman, she said, what in the hell are you talking about? Who the hell could be for sweatshops? She graduated from Michigan, like Glenn here, so she needs to clean up her language. But I told her, I've looked into this, and there's a considerable body of academic material, peer-reviewed articles, to support the propriety of sweatshops. But that shouldn't surprise me, because I spent 34 years trying cases, too. And as a litigator, there's always an argument, no matter how implausible it might be, that you can bring to the other side of the table, no matter who you're defending or what they did. This is not a binary issue. This is not either they work in sweatshops and lift themselves magically out of poverty following the Northwood idea, or, I don't have to worry about getting fired anymore, or, they go back to nothing. They go back to drug abuse and slavery and indentured servitude. It's not a binary world. If I were an economist, God forbid, if I were an economist, I may view it as a binary issue. If I were intellectually disingenuous and myopic, I would view it as a binary issue. It is not. It isn't poverty in its most adjunct sense, or rising to, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps and rising to economic prosperity. There is a role, a deontological role for government, society, for all of us in this room to take to heart the need to address this problem. They can continue to work while they are assisted in making where they work better, making the conditions better. When I talk about the issues that face these people, I will show you, and yes, I have some of those photographs designed to make people cry, and I hope to hell you do. Because when we are done tonight, if you can listen to both sides of this issue, and you can go home and put your head on a nice clean pillow and go to sleep with a clear conscience, knowing that your closet is filled with at least some items made in sweatshops, then you're someone I don't want to know. This is an issue of human imperative. This is a matter of human dignity. Alex is a good and decent man. Surprised you when I said that, didn't it? Alex is a good and decent man, and he's a very religious man. He has written, as we'll talk about later on, extensively about the correlation between his religion and sweatshops, and child labor for that matter. In the liberal world of New York, where I come from, we don't accept that. We don't accept that it is all or none. We accept that there is a world out there that can be made better incrementally by each and every one of us. In the 1990s, student movements across this country, 1995 to 1997 in particular, took off across this country. Thousands and thousands of students. It was beautiful. I was teaching at another college at the time. Developed a conscience overnight almost, and began an anti-sweatshop movement across this country. They put pressure on administrations to divest the colleges and universities from investments in companies that dealt and traded in sweatshop labor. It's not just multinational corporations, and please bear this in mind. It's not just M&Es. It is also contract labor. Contract labor is worse because so much of it is unregulated. Contract labor occurs when a company from the United States, say, decides to manufacture goods in Bangladesh, but they want some distance between that process. They don't want the proximity of being dirtied, soiled by the process. So they contract with someone, and sometimes that gets contracted out again, subcontracted and subcontracted. In Bangladesh, there are almost right now 2 times as many unregulated sweatshops as regulated sweatshops, and the regulated ones are abysmal. This, folks, is something that requires mental heavy lifting. It's not a simple argument. It's not a matter of free enterprise. It's not a matter of reducing it to an economic argument. If it's only a matter of an economic argument, we can cut the time and go home and watch the pregame because I lose. I'm not an economist. I am a political scientist, a lawyer, and someone who has spent a lot of time experiencing sweatshops as well as my opponent, but from a different perspective, and I've done it globally. This is a matter that should tug at your heartstrings. This is a matter that should appeal to you viscerally. This is a matter that, if you understand it completely, should compel you to care about what you buy in the future and where you get it from. Don't worry about this specious argument that you're going to be putting some kid in Bangladesh and Dhaka out on the streets again, because that is, quite honestly, what's the technical word I'm looking for? My students know it. Bull, and you know the rest. That's simply not the case. We heard a lot of very broad arguments made, but we heard no specifics. Now, I know that, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe you're a Keynesian, is that right?
Me?
Yes.
God forbid.
Yes, I know. Austrian school. Yes. Yeah, whatever, same difference. Yeah. The difference is Keynesians like math and the others don't. We didn't hear any empirical arguments about this thing. We heard broad-based statements. We didn't hear any evidence other than kind of sort of opinions, but nothing to knit together the argument that states that this is an issue that is more than just reduced to economic graphs. It's not just an economic issue. Alex talked about this is something we should, liberals should not deplore, I believe you said, from our first world couches. Well, guess what? I got my ass off my first world couch, and I spent a lot of time in Bangladesh, as I'll show you. Not just going in with a camera and photographing, but we requested permission to live with these people, because only when you do that can you begin to understand what their day is like, what their life is like, what their weeks are like, what their hopes are, and talk to them. These are beautiful, decent, wonderful people. I found them in Southeast Asia. I found them in South Asia. I found them in every corner of the world I've gone to where I found sweatshop labor. They deserve our attention. They deserve our solutions. You can make a difference, and we'll talk more about how that can happen later on. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks. And our speakers now have 7 minutes each for cross-examination. And we'll begin with Professor Takaro.
So is it from here?
Yeah, you can do it right from there. Yep.
I have just 12 very simple yes/no questions. The first one: if more wealthy collectors, and that's as much for the prosecution as for the jury here. Think about it, all of you guys. If more wealthy collectors bid for a Picasso painting, is it more likely that its price will go up? Yes or no?
Before I answer your question, I am not a defendant under oath in a trial. Therefore, rendering once again a binary offering to a question like this is somewhat meaningless. But if you'd repeat your question again, a Picasso painting and then it...
If there are more wealthy collectors bidding for a Picasso painting, is it more likely that its price will go up?
Perhaps.
Okay. If more producers bid for a scarce resource like oil, is it more likely that oil prices will go up?
First, is the Picasso painting stolen? And secondly, how was the oil produced?
Fracking.
Oh, God. Well, I got to make a note of that. All right.
So let me repeat it again. If more producers bid for a scarce resource like oil, is it more likely that oil prices will go up? And it's a ceteris paribus question. In economics, that's how we work. If there are no other changing factors.
I'm familiar with how economics
Trying
works.
to see one factor, how it affects another.
I've studied economics also at the undergraduate and graduate level. I've learned one thing, and a lot of students can tell you this. Any good economics text is better than Ambien any day. So yes. In a binary theoretical sense that doesn't apply to people, in your two-dimensional sense, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Is labor a scarce resource like oil, subject to the same laws of supply and demand?
It depends on where you are. It depends on the government. It depends on a number of factors.
It depends
That is simply a question that is too ridiculously complicated to reduce to a binary answer.
No, it's a very simple question.
Perhaps for you.
Producers demand resources. Labor is a resource. Is it subject to the same laws of supply and demand?
It
If there is more of it,
depends
will the
on where.
price go
It is
down?
not a yes or no.
If there is a higher demand, will the price go up?
I'm sorry. If anything, I am a Keynesian. It is not that simple.
No, Keynesians would agree with this.
Now you're telling me what the Keynesians think. First you were telling me what I was going to say. Okay, go ahead.
It's in every economics textbook.
Tell me the answer you want, then I'll give it to you.
I would like to hear the answer from you.
Okay.
Is labor a scarce resource like oil,
from my previous question, subject to the same laws of supply and demand? Yes or no?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's not a yes or no answer.
My goodness, this is not a presidential debate, and I'm not asking about Benghazi. Okay.
No, we can compare hand size later.
Okay. Number 4, let's see. I said these are simple yes and no. Any student here can answer those in a few seconds, but let's continue. If you and I agree to exchange things that belong to us, is it because we expect to benefit?
Are you talking about the exchange concept, which every article supporting your position refers to?
I'm talking about real life, real people.
It
If they agree to
depends.
exchange things, is it because they expect to be better off after the exchange?
Not necessarily. It depends. Sometimes exchanges are not fair. Sometimes there's not full disclosure. Sometimes people exchange things that they would hate to give up, and they're forced to.
If there is no force, my first slide I opened.
So it's not so binary.
Okay, without force. Okay, I can go on for, I don't know, how many minutes do I have?
I'll give you some of my
Spend the
time.
other minutes complicating this issue?
No,
or are you going
I
to
will
take
give
it?
you some of my time. My
Do it
questions for you are
binary.
very
Okay,
simple.
let's do it binary. Okay, if something prevents that voluntary exchange, is it more likely that you will be worse off? If you wanted to exchange something, gaining something else in return, and if something prevents this exchange, is it more likely that you will be worse off? Is it more likely that you will be worse off?
That may be one of the most bizarre questions I think I've ever encountered. I'm going to do my best to honestly answer it. It depends on the parity and the equity of the exchange.
Okay, it depends. Okay, if you have more than one job offer, would you choose the best one? It depends.
Yeah. That's why I'm married up.
If you make $1 worth of product,
I'm sorry, $1 worth.
if you make just $1 worth of products, would you be paid more than $1 by a profit maximizing firm?
Of course not.
Okay, good. Finally we have a yes or no. Okay, are wealthier people more likely to live and work in safer buildings?
I don't know that's necessarily true. I mean, I can take you to parts of New York City where that's not necessarily true.
Okay. All right.
No one said it was going to be easy, Alex.
No, I don't see how it's not easy. Everybody can see.
I know, of
to those
course you
questions.
don't.
All right, never mind. This is a very smart audience. They have been able to connect the dots so far. So one last thing and I rest my case. If you have a child and the choice is between starving them or sending them to work in a sweatshop, would you starve them? If it's a binary world, you know.
Of course I would starve them, Alex.
You would starve them.
Of course I would starve them. What a ridiculous question.
Good. I'm done.
My turn? I'm not going to use 7 minutes. Alex, I want to talk about a couple of statements that I believe you've written, one of which you kind of tangentially touched on. Tell me if this is something that sounds familiar. You used to write for something called
World Magazine.
World Mag, right? worldmag.com. And I think you stopped in 2012?
About that time.
Yeah, exactly. It was in March. You wrote on March 7th, your last article, you wrote in 2012, a commentator called me, quote, one of the most ardent defenders of sweatshop labor, quote unquote. Yes, I am. I am proud of it. I'll tell you something more. I also ardently support child labor. Not only because I care, not because I care for the poor children any less than you do. I support sweatshops and child labor as a Christian as well as an economist. I heard you at a faculty meeting when I first became aware of you. make the statement that God wants more sweatshops. We made that in a statement at the Midland Country Club.
No.
I was surrounded by people that are still on faculty here. I turned to the left, I turned to the right, I said, is something going on? Am I delusional? They said, no, you heard it. But that comports with what you've written. Explain to me, please, what is the correlation between your Christian faith, which I honor and respect, your Christian faith and child labor, wanting and believing that child labor is a good and decent thing?
Why is it a good and decent thing?
Yes.
Okay, you want me to make the moral argument. I already made the economic one. I led you to make it yourself, but you sabotaged my questions. Never mind that. Why is it a moral argument? It is a simple thing. God is not a tyrant. Whatever God wants us to do, we have to do freely, with a joyful heart. So, this understanding of what God is, the nature of God that I have come to personally as a Christian, is in a perfect alignment with my economics ideas as a classical liberal, as one who judges things by the non-aggression principle. There is nothing moral about someone wanting to use the government as a tool of enforcing outcomes on people who otherwise would voluntarily do it in a different way. So my moral argument is for child labor that those people in the actual world that we live in, it's not a binary world, it's a very complicated world, and yet sometimes it's a yes or no. Either this happens or that happens. You asked for some data. Bangladesh is where you went. There used to be a sweatshop where girls worked long hours, horrible conditions, very low pay, much better than anything else that was out there. The data that I have actually, that I have offered here, and that I still have more of it, does not come from free market economists. It comes from institutions that are trying to end sweatshops, same as you and your student back in the 1960s. So the data comes from Oxfam on Bangladesh. Those children whose products, sweatshop products, were boycotted. They put pressure on the government and that sweatshop was closed. You think they went to some sunny schools where they gained education so they can get better jobs than sweatshops? No. According to Oxfam data, most of these girls went to prostitution. That was the next best thing for them. And that's not a binary textbook. It's real life. That's Bangladesh. Where
Alex, I tell you, you're batting 1,000, my friend. Every single article, every single argument you've made contained in one single Claremont McKenna study. And I'm sure you're familiar with Matt Zielinski from UCLA, who's made many of the same articles, arguments that you're making here, in peer-reviewed material that he's produced as well. Well, let me ask you this, just out of curiosity, Alex, when was the last time you were in Bangladesh in a sweatshop?
I've never been to Bangladesh. As I said, I worked.
Yeah, okay. The binary question, that was no, it's a binary question, yes or no? You're under oath.
Yes or no?
Yes.
That was not a yes or no question.
No, yes or no. It's not complex. So you haven't been, you've read about them and you've studied them and you read the outdated Oxfam data that's been debunked.
It's been debunked.
Yes, it has been debunked, Alex, and you know that. But
no, I don't.
But you know this through the refracted lens of pages that you've turned and internet articles that you've posted on worldmag.com. Is that correct? You've not been to sweatshops in Bangladesh. No. Have you been to them in the Philippines?
No.
Have you been to them in sub-Saharan Africa?
No.
Anywhere in South Asia?
I've never been to Asia.
South Asia?
No.
Okay. So you truly do understand this as an academic, and that is the sole source of your experience with this phenomena. Yes or no?
Lived through it. No.
No.
It's not the only one.
No. That doesn't, it's not the same. I guarantee you, my friend, the sweatshop that you describe doesn't come close to Dhaka. I have been to Bulgaria before, and I've been to Dhaka many, many times. I guarantee you, Dhaka wins hands down every day. It is not even close. I'm glad that you made it out. I'm glad that you pulled yourself up. And I truly do applaud the fact that you are now a U.S. citizen. There goes my first line of defense. I was going to seek to have you deported. But, and obviously that's not going to happen. But
I thought you were a progressive. You don't believe in?
no, there's some folks. No. Time out.
I wasn't kidding when I said it was going to be a lively debate. Okay. All right. So,
Time over? It's over? The assignment is over.
all right, now you have the opportunity to prepare questions for our speakers by writing your question on one of the 3x5 cards that are actually going to be passed out. You can write down your question, hand those back to the student, give them to me. But we'll take a 10-minute break, and during that break, we will accumulate these questions, compile them, and the next session we have will be a 15-minute Q&A. So take a few minutes to do that. Be back here in 10 minutes. Okay. Oh, good. Thank you.
I may use some of them if they have questions that are relevant.
Oh, okay, because I don't know how we get, our slides are queued up here, so I don't know how we get back and forth. No, I see it's up there now. I've decided to find them to close. Okay. You mean like I know how to do this?
Well, I know you know how to do that.
No, you'd be surprised. Yeah, no, it's working fine now. My concern is if we go over to his slides, then coming back to mine, I give you a hand cue. I thought we were fighting the Cold War. I thought we were fighting the Cold War.
Yeah, we have to give it a show. Why would they spend 2 hours on Monday night?
Especially when the national championship game is going to be.
Is that the basketball?
Yeah. I think the game's at 9. What's that?
The only American sport that
Is what?
the only American sport that I understand.
I was going to research the soccer team starts with L. Did it start with L?
Oh, that's it, yeah.
No, I was going to research it to see if I could bring that up to you, but I forgot. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Oh, okay, yeah, sure, to fill out the survey? Okay.
So for the survey, the mini URL may not be working, so tell them to go with the QR code, and if they're Android users, they'll have to download a QR reader app.
RL, okay, will not work if you're Android. So download you said QR reader?
QR reader, yeah. And then we also have 30, this is not, we should have 30 paper surveys that they're welcome to get to.
Oh, okay.
So tell them to either use the QR, download the QR reader,
Okay,
or get a paper survey.
okay,
How's that?
sounds good, yep.
Thanks, Jim.
I can do that. Terrific. It is, yeah?
You're fine. No, I can't tell at all. You had told me. Bangladesh, did you need to go through those slides?
We went through the program, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't have gotten that with them. So I just studied for you.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay, because you can't see them, they can see you. Right. So don't spread them. No.
They give me that.
I know, I get so many of them. And I hated it. I hated to come back with those Princeton ones.
I know, Jesus. They had the probably raised crest on them.
People on the street in New York. Yeah, sure. I tell you what, we'll wait until we're done. And that way they can.
What does he want?
Oh, he wants to get a picture.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
On the way out of here, can I steal the poster downstairs?
Yeah, you can say as many of those.
I'm going to take that back because I got the beard. I look hideous. I'm so glad I shaved it up.
Were you? It was the best of the ones you sent me. Okay, so don't sweat it. Just make sure you got her. Just say,
Yeah, I see that.
you're
Yeah,
not getting what you want. You just say, I'm going through my slides.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but don't hesitate. Now, do you guys want to go longer with questions? I mean, I hate to extend it a bit, but it looks like Joe's got about 1,000.
Yeah.
Any number of questions. You review them if they are good questions.
She's handling it.
Yeah, as long as they're good questions.
I don't care. I mean, the national championship, like I said, I know the score.
But you guys still got to
I
keep
don't
it
watch
short.
basketball, so it doesn't matter. We can go to
But we have to like.
But you still got to keep it short. Yeah. Yeah, your answers, yeah.
it depends.
Oh, I need my reading glasses.
Okay, I'll lead off with the survey. Okay. I thank you for your patience. Professor Ouellette got about 6,500 questions, and so she's been processing those. But I want to say something about the surveys. Apparently the URL is not working. If anybody's had success with that, let me know, but what I'm hearing is that it's not working. So to do that survey, you have a few options. Obviously, if you have an iPhone, you can use the QR code. If you have an Android phone, you don't have a QR reader, you can download that pretty easily. You could do that and knock it off that way. Also, this young lady here has plain, old-fashioned paper surveys, but I only got about 30 of them. So if you can do it on your phone or your tablet or your computer, that would be best. But if you want to fill it out the old-fashioned way, see her and fill them out and give them back to her before you leave, and we'll get them in that way. Because, of course, I'm dying to know what you think of the event, and we want your feedback. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator.
Okay. All right. Thank you. This was very interesting. We have all kinds of questions, so thank you so much for your participation there. We appreciate it. Some of these are for specific professors. Others, they may be just kind of in general. We want to take maybe 15, 20 minutes or so for this session, and there are lots of questions. I actually narrowed them down. They started kind of repeating themselves, so we'll just kind of do the best we can in terms of being able to I kind of take over who would like to answer some, and again, as I said, some are specific to each of you. So, for Professor Johnson, let's take a look at this. This one says, no one is forcing those impoverished people to work at these sweatshops. Then what is keeping them there if they are not in the best interest of their current circumstances?
Well, first, the first part of the question is false. I'm sorry?
You know, I went through this all day today. This is at SVSU. Is that better? Okay. Because next time I do this, and everybody pays a price. The first part of the question, would you repeat the first part of the question?
No one is forcing those impoverished people to work at these sweatshops.
Let's stop the question right there. That is absolutely not true in some cases. And this goes back to the exchange concept, which is frequently argued in peer-reviewed articles and the handful of texts that are around supporting sweatshops. The exchange concept assumes in this arbitrary theoretical world that people are exchanging things freely. There is no free exchange here. These are people fighting for their freaking lives.
How does that mean it's not free?
I'm sorry?
How is that not free?
Not free choice? Mm-hmm. Oh, so the 11-year-old child. Well, let's go even back further. The 7-year-old boy that I interviewed outside of Peshawar at a brick factory, who had been working there for 2 years after being sold into slavery by his parents who couldn't afford him. His hair was tinged already. His dark hair was tinged already orange, a sign of malnutrition. His teeth had rotted out already. This child, through an interpreter, told me, I have no life. I want to die. Where's the freedom in that, Alex? How does your God look down on that child outside of Peshawar and say, this is for the greater good. We're maximizing social utility.
It's on. It's green and it's on. In my very first slide, I don't know if you noticed it, I said what
No.
I'm going to argue tonight. And I will not argue in favor of slavery. Quite obviously, I'm a classical liberal, so I do not endorse slavery. If there are cases where those people are taken against their will, this is against all of my beliefs, both as a Christian, as a classical liberal too. So this is not the case we are arguing here.
It is a case because you are the ardent supporter of child labor, according to you.
Yes?
Okay, children don't have the ability to consent.
People still need to eat, whether they're young or old. In all of these cases, we cannot wish away the constraints of the real world.
The question is freedom of consent.
Very often it is a binary question. These kids either have to take a job, just like our ancestors here in this country, my country, in any other country in the history of the world. Children don't want to work if they can get the food in any other way, if that other way is preferable. And parents, of course, don't want their children to work. The data that you so easily dismiss tells us something about history. It is true for the United States, it is true for the United Kingdom, it is true for any country in the history of the world. When the output per person is below $3,000 to $4,000, most children have to work or they don't survive. It is only when the income per capita reaches the level of $10,000 to $11,000 per capita, that is where the parents choose to take those kids out of the labor market and send them to school. That's because the parents love their children. They don't want to cause them harm. But if the choice is between starving them and sending them to work, well, I think it's a no-brainer for all of you here.
And I would submit to you it's a no-brainer that there are other alternatives.
Okay.
Yes, prostitution, stealing, begging, agriculture, which is much more dangerous and pays much less. All of these are alternatives. And they're free to take those.
All right, next
But they
question.
choose not to.
I do want to get to the second half of the basketball game, so we're going to have to...
Okay. This is actually from one of my fashion students. Would it make any difference if we, as fashion buyers, pay more for supplies, and or would that upcharge go straight to the CEO's pockets of the sweatshop? I think it has to do with the fact that sweatshop, the system more than likely is corrupt.
Yes.
Anytime we may charge more for a garment, for example, or even the textiles, the argument is that it will charge more for the end consumer. If that's the case indeed, will those extra money that's made go through the corrupt system and simply stop at that production facility or the CEO of that supplier?
I don't think it can be accomplished through industry compliance. Industry compliance doesn't work in this country. It doesn't work in most countries. And certainly self-compliance doesn't. That's why free markets suck in that sense. There's the necessity of having this deontological approach that says we need an outside extrinsic force within which remedies can be achieved. To answer the question specifically, the Matt Zielinski article, Matt Zielinski writes a lot of this stuff, these peer-reviewed articles in favor of sweatshops. He's at UCLA. He came there from San Diego. And he writes, this is page 43 on one of his articles, where he writes that if Reebok can pay someone 50 cents and sell the shoe for $100, what is wrong with that? And he goes on in his footnote and says, for one thing, the shareholders will be satisfied. I'm sure as hell they would. Again, if you can be a shareholder of a company like that, if you can wear Reeboks and that were the situation, you're not somebody I want to know. It's a very simple question.
Okay, thank you. What would, and this is again for either of you, what would you propose to replace these sweatshops, seeing how it is only the only source of income for many of these people? You may have mentioned it a little bit already with regards to how would they rise from poverty, Dr. Tokoroff, and with regards to some other alternatives. How about perhaps some reasonable alternatives? But what else could we, what how could these sweatshops or these occupations?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Alex in his opening statement made the statement, and I made a note of it here, that the idea is simply to close sweatshops. The Bleeding Heart liberals want to simply close sweat. That's ridiculous. It is absolutely a non-starter. There are methods by which you can use international labor standards. I know you hate unions. I got it. All right? International labor standards that are available. Some sweatshops actually in Bangladesh have gone into compliance with international labor standards. And they're gradually improving, not because of free markets, but because of international labor standards. There are other things we can do in terms of enforcing existing wage laws. So much in Bangladesh is done off the charts, not in formal sweatshops, but informal, unregulated ones. Again, they outnumber, as of last year, they outnumber the known regulated ones by almost 2 to 1. Those are the spots where minimum wage laws, which do exist, are not adhered to. We can enforce existing laws. We can enforce building codes, for Christ's sakes, so people don't die in building collapses or fires. There are a number of things we can approach this from, a number of ways we can approach it from. But simply to suggest that we're going to close sweatshops is absolutely, totally ridiculous.
Should I also
Sure, yes,
answer
go ahead,
this
yeah.
one? Okay. The question for tonight's debate was, does the world need more sweatshops? And I say yes. And this is how I answer this particular question, and you will easily understand, and Professor Johnson would have reached the same conclusion had he, instead of avoiding the questions, answered them yes and no. We have known this for more than a century. One question that you answered actually explains the upper bound of your wages, the highest that they can pay. And as you understand, this is determined without any doubt whatsoever, not just in textbooks but in real life. It is determined by your productivity. And the fact is that those people in sweatshops have very, very low productivity compared to our workers here. 85%, and you can mock the empirical data all you want, but this is how science works. Not by visiting Bangladesh, but by rigorously collecting data and analyzing it. So 85% of the difference between your wages and their wages in the sweatshops is explained by what? By their productivity. This is the upper bound. Where is the lower bound? It's also not a mystery. We've known it for more than 100 years. You study economics, you would know the first week when you take economics, you study about what? Opportunity costs. And those people can still work in agriculture. In fact, unfortunately, most of those kids still work in agriculture, where they make much less than what they earn in the sweatshops or in the urban informal sector. So the difference is between the upper bound determined by your productivity and the lower, which is determined by the opportunity cost of your time. That is where your wage will be. Professor Johnson mentioned something about labor laws. Well, guess what? When we were growing in the 19th century here in the United States and England, starting even earlier, there were no such labor laws. Because of the higher productivity, such labor laws could be established without actually killing all these people. Let me tell you, collective bargaining was adopted in the United States in 1935. Child labor laws at the federal level, 1938. Minimum wage, 1938. Occupational safety and health, 1970. Unemployment insurance, 1935. Equality of opportunity, 1964. Working time restrictions, 1940. Maternity leave, 1993. Guess how long those people in the third world have to work until they reach the productivity levels of the Americans at the time that those laws were put in place. I'll tell you how long. For collective bargaining to be able to have the same kind of bargaining power, they have to work another 29 years if they grow at the same rate, which is why I say more sweatshops, because that is what increases their upper and lower bounds by increase competition for that labor. For child labor laws, they need to work an additional 35 years. Minimum wages, again, 35 years. For occupational safe and healthy, the OSHA, they need to work another 80
If
years.
you can summarize that.
More than a century.
I'm enjoying this. I think
For
you should go
maternity
on.
leave. The data is all here. I can show it to you later.
Just a quick comment. First and foremost, I love you, Alex. Every single one of those laws that you mentioned, with the exception of one, occurred during Democratic presidencies and Congresses. Thank you.
Good. They
Good bleeding out liberals.
did before them.
Good bleeding out liberals provided.
Okay, we need to get going. Thank you. Great. All right, next question. Why can't society be educated so that basic human rights can be respected without sacrificing economic profit? Why do factories have to be sweatshops? If you would like to take that, Professor Tucker.
Why can't people be educated? I think that's all I'm doing.
Society be educated.
Society
Why can't Society be
educated.
educated.
Well, you can't educate societies or governments. Only people can be educated. Those people who come to my classes, they are educated and they understand the realities. They understand we don't have any Bernie Sanders magical dust or a Hillary Clinton magic wand that we can just wish away all these constraints.
Do they have any Donald Trump bullshit?
Stages as the United States or the United Kingdom or any other country for that matter went through. Hong Kong went in a very short time from one of the poorest places in the poorest continent after the Second World War to having living standards that were higher than those in their colonial masters, the United Kingdom. Why? Because they're allowed for unregulated sweatshops. They had no restrictions on this. In just half a lifetime, Hong Kong became the miracle. Why? More sweatshops.
Okay, thank you. Anything like that?
Yeah, it was a relatively simple question. Could you repeat it again? It was just very, very
Why
simple.
can't society be educated so that basic human rights can be respected without sacrificing economic profit? Why do factories have to be sweatshops?
They don't. Society can. It requires a desire. It requires mental heavy lifting and not taking the easy one or two dimensional way out. It requires believing that we can create a better world for the next generation through something other than a binary answer, a simple, disingenuous answer to a very complicated problem. The person asks an elegant question, there's an elegant, simple answer. We can do that. We can create that world, and you can make a difference. Every one of you can.
Thank you. Next question. This has a little bit of a narrative with that, so bear with me. Having worked in the fashion industry for the last 5 years and experiencing Indian sweatshops for 5 weeks straight, I really hope to see a debate and not a comedy show. Mr. Johnson, please describe the life there. Tell people about the homeless living in slums, drinking polluted water, and slow starvation. Tell them about the open wounds they are carrying around because every system failed them. How after all that, even a little bit of money under such bad conditions really beat the binary option, poverty and suffering. And you may address that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd certainly address it in the closing. I'll show you in the closing.
Okay.
Stick around.
Excellent. All right, next question.
I have an answer to that one.
Oh, okay. Well, sure.
I already said it. 1 billion people in 25 years. And of course, it's not going to lift everyone immediately. It took America 100 years, okay, to get to that stage where you can have most of the kids out of the labor force.
Excellent. Professor Johnson, where was your tie manufactured?
I am so ready for this.
Okay.
Yeah. You think for 1 second that I would come here without inspecting what I've got on? Virtually everything that I have, with the exception of the shoes, were manufactured in the United States. Okay. And thank God my wife paid for them.
And about 98% of all shoes are made overseas, so
Yeah.
it's going to be very difficult to find anything domestic. Okay, what characteristics, for example, stick out in your experiences between typical sweatshops of third world countries of which you are familiar and the one that Professor Tokarov was mentioning in Bulgaria? I think this is a pretty good opportunity to kind of give us a few distinctions between a sweatshop is a sweatshop is a sweatshop. Is that really the case? maybe some differences.
Yeah, no, they're not. And I'm sure Alex will attest to that. Not all sweatshops are created equal. Would you agree with that, Alex?
Absolutely. Depending on the level of productivity, some sweatshops are better, which is why I want more sweatshops, to increase productivity.
We're talking about living conditions and working conditions.
Absolutely.
They're not all created equal.
They are
Some
connected.
Some
worse.
sweatshops in this country are almost tolerable. They still meet the legal definition in some cases of sweatshops.
Sure.
And then you can go to places like Dhaka, Chittagong, or Mindanao Island in the Philippines, and you can find places where you not only can be paid by the piece rate and not be able to take bathroom breaks, but also catch diseases while you're on the job. Not all sweatshops are created equal.
Absolutely.
How
And there's a
about
reason for that.
some experiences you've had? Some experiences
Productivity, I'm sure.
Comparing that to,
I can't compare from personal experience. I can only compare from the data that I have learned. And yes, my sweatshops under socialist regime in the 1980s were way better than they are right now in some of those third world countries. Why? Our level of productivity was higher. Okay? It's a very simple answer.
okay, next question. Do sweatshops encourage complacency? Is it not looking for something better?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've lived with these people. I've gone home with them. I've spent time with them on the job during the day. No, there's no complacency in misery. There's no complacency in pain. There's no complacency in suffering. There's only an abrogation of human dignity.
Terrific. Thank you very much for your questions. I appreciate that. This lively debate is very exciting. Now, actually, our speakers will have 7 minutes for their closing statements, and we'll actually begin with Professor Johnson.
We are going to see a few of these bleeding heart slides, okay, designed to tug at your heartstrings, as I was told they would. You know, before I came here, before I got on the plane to come here, I talked to my students at Ithaca College in New York and said why I was coming here and do this. And I asked them, I said, let's see, I said, they're all relatively wealthy kids. I said, I'm willing to bet that at least half of you, if not 3/4 of you right now, have at least something on, or multiple items, made in sweatshops. I said, take off all your clothes right now. But then I said, no, let's not do that. Go home and do it. And I gave them an assignment. Go home tonight, take off everything you're wearing right now, and do what you can to find out where it was made. They came back, and I said, how many people were wearing items that were made, they believe, in sweatshop labor, at least in manufactured contract labor? And at least 3/4 of the hands went up. I said, all right, knowing what we know about sweatshops, and we've covered them in my classes, I said, keep your hand up if you would pay 5% more for an item if you knew that that money, that 5% was not going to go to line the pockets of a CEO or to shareholders for dividends or because of increased productivity to buy new equipment or whatever. If it was going to go to this extrinsic structure created to help make these environments better, not to eliminate them, to make it better. And most of the hands stayed up. I said 10%. Most of the hands stayed up. 15%. A few came down. 20%. There still were a sizable number. Now, granted, these kids are fairly well off. But we're starting to measure the fact that people are willing to make a difference. And if I ask you in this room right now, if you would be willing to pay more for whatever it is you consume, to make certain that the people that produced it for your enjoyment had a better life, I'm willing to bet on your conscience, on your morality, on your ethics, and on your soul that you do the right thing. I may not be correct, but I think I am, because I think I know a lot of you. Let's take a look at some of these slides. We'll get past this stuff because, you know, this doesn't interest Alex. This is just a young girl in a horrible condition. Again, just a group of young people in Bangladesh suffering greatly in 16 to 18-hour shifts, 6.5 days a week. If they're lucky. Other times they're paid by the piece rate, so they have to work 16 to 18-hour days. Or if they're in Chile, they work in silver mines, 12 to 14-hour days, 7 days a week. CBS did a documentary on that. I'm sure you can debunk that. This is, you mentioned how great it is that folks could come in from agricultural, agrarian parts of the country and come to the more urbanized area. This is what you get. This is one of the finer areas of southern Dhaka. It is also not atypical. Dhaka is a huge, huge city. That's a very typical kind of scene in Dhaka. These are children. We went and we stayed with a mother. You mentioned mothers working. We stayed with them 4 days. This is how they live. They don't own land. Bangladesh is right on the Bay of Bengal level in terms of sea level. It floods constantly. Monsoon season's coming up. 30, 40,000 people are going to die, because they do every year. They're swept out to sea from areas like this in the night when monsoons hit. But we read about it in section 2 or page 18 of the New York Times, and a little paragraph or two, because, again, they're brown, they're Muslim, and they don't impact us. That's how they live. They build these elevated homes on swamps, entire little cities and villages. They don't own the land, they don't own the area. They could be evicted in a minute if anybody could figure out who the hell owned it. And many of them die in their neighborhoods from the conditions they're forced to live in. This is a little closer one. That's their sidewalk. Sometimes they fall through, sometimes they don't. Some of these areas go, the middle class people get to live in the corrugated metal roofing areas in behind. They're the lucky ones. Most of these people, like the couple we stayed with, there's a small little area, smaller than this podium, lectern. There's a small heating unit in the middle. That is the kitchen for 5 families. All right? Every single one of those are families with single mothers, children, and they're all employed. Okay? They're all employed in sweatshops. Sometimes they live in between the railroad tracks because the government doesn't care about that. Sometimes they roll over at night and they die in the process. This is the result of a collapse of a building in Dhaka, Bangladesh in 2013, the Rana Plaza. When that collapsed, this picture's gone viral. I did not take this picture. This picture's gone viral. It's called A Hug. 2 people that survived the initial collapse were trapped for days and hugged each other as they died. That's part of what's left of another individual. But they made clothes. Some of you may have some. These are some of the companies that they make contract labor for them. But Alex, I want to leave you with my version of your God, at least what I'm led to believe your God says. Speak out on behalf of those who are voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable. Speak out in order to judge with righteousness and to defend the needy and the poor. I think that's from a document that you hold near and dear. That is the kind of individual, that's the kind of writing, that's the kind of message that says we can do something. You can't do it by sitting around pontificating about what X and Y graphs have to say. You can do it by getting off your ass and doing something, and every one of you have the power to do it. You do. You have the ability to make a difference. You can do it on this campus. And it will be welcomed, actually. Maybe not universally, but it will be welcomed. My time is up.
I actually agree with the last thing that Jim said tonight. I just don't believe in his solution. I think we can all do something about it, which is why I am spending 2 hours tonight talking about it. Some of you are old enough to remember back in the 1990s, Katie Lee Gifford crying next to President Bill Clinton about the fact that some of her clothes were made in Honduras in a sweatshop. The case of Wendy Diaz became popular at the time because she worked for 31 cents an hour. For 1 year, she made $967. Just $967 a year. Gosh, in my family, we make that much per person per month. This, by the way, if you crunch the numbers, translates into $2.75 per hour. More than 15% of the people in this country lived on less than $1 at that time. Nearly 30% lived on less than $2. What this girl was making in that sweatshop at 15 was 37% higher than the average income. How many of you young people here at Northwood or guests made 37% higher than the average in America? And these pictures are horrible, of course. I said it's okay to cry. But if they had the technology, you would have been able to see the same pictures taken of your ancestors 100, 200 years ago. Some of them would have been much worse than what Jim is showing us from Bangladesh today. Most of humanity's progress in the past 2 centuries was the unintended result of the actions of rapacious entrepreneurs whose only concern was to take advantage of the profit opportunities offered by cheap labor. No matter how base the motives of those involved, the result has been to move hundreds of millions of people from abject poverty to something significantly better. The Rana Plaza tragedy. Yes, there are such horrible workplace accidents. It is a human tragedy on a grand scale. It's also a symptom, that's why I asked one question about safety in buildings. It is a symptom of Bangladesh's low level of economic development. And this, as I mentioned earlier, cannot be wished away. If US businesses reduce their activity, as Jim wants them to do, in Bangladesh because of accidents like this, it will only slow the process that is the key to achieving safety improvements. Don't forget that at the time of your own grandparents, most American children worked longer hours at harder jobs than the children who make your shoes and shirts in Bangladesh or Honduras today. Before Great Britain became the wealthiest nation, more than a third of the English boys between 10 and 14 were gainfully employed more than 60 hours per week without any health insurance or vacation time. Today, less than 1 in 3 African boys and just 1 out of 6 Indian boys are finding such gainful employment desirable or available to them. The more these economies grow, the more parents withdraw their children from the labor force. Your opposition to sweatshops, in fact, and I've been to many conferences talking to many economists who come from those third world countries, and we talked about sweatshops, and the American opposition to sweatshops puzzles them. Blinded by your prosperity, you want to force upon the third world our first world environmental and labor standards. And I know people like Jim and others who oppose sweatshops, you guys mean well. You're decent, good guys. But you produce misery. Your efforts sabotage the road for poor parents to rise above subsistence. And you force more children to engage in crime and prostitution. Many parents today are as poor as the Americans were during the Civil War. And most of them make the same hard choices. Find jobs for their children or starve the family. Do you think you love those children more than their parents love them? Do you presume to be able to make better choices for them from your suburbia paradise? When you oppose sweatshops, be it on economically unsound or ideologically skewed, or in some cases pseudo-religious principles, you close the best opportunities for the poorest of the poor that they currently have to make a living, to accumulate skills and capital, to start their own businesses and provide better choices for the next generation. So next time your leftist friend tries to recruit you to boycott sweatshops, you may want to tell their bleeding heart to wake up their slothful brain and go talk to the people that they want to help. And you may hear in reply, give us more sweatshops. Thank you.